at DataScan. Brian, take it away.
Thanks, Gary, and thank you, Rick. Wanted to again also thank Victoriam Solutions. They asked me to participate in this and share DataScan's story. As you find out, they had a intimate role in some of our digital transformation, and we'll get into a lot of that today. So today we are going to tackle making the C-suite case. We're, leadership and cultural buy-in for digital transformation and what that meant to DataScan. And we're going to do it kind of more in a case study way, right? We're going to take a look today at what DataScan is, a little bit of our history. We're going to talk a little bit about what's led us to this point to start making that decision, and then go through the whole process, including the C-suite case. I'd say that 10 times, right? So without further ado, we'll get started. So a little bit about myself. I'm not going to read my bio, and obviously it's available to you through the portal. But I have been a 20-plus year member or director or executive in the financial services industry. You'll see on my list here, one of them is UGA Finance. That has nothing to do with the University of Georgia. It happened to be a tiny little finance company in, believe it or not, Kansas City, Missouri. And we made loans to consumers and service them out of UGA Finance. So not the same, but good, strange little coincidence nonetheless. I also am still an active member at my alma mater, Missouri Western State University. I participate and serve on their business advisory council. And that is, an obligation I'm happy to participate back in. This school gave a lot to me. I was, a farm boy from Northwest Missouri, and Missouri Western was great, a great little education for me, and it's led me to this spot. So I'd be remiss not to promote DataScan a little bit, and feel free to link into myself. I do have, here's my social media and the company's social media outlets. Again, this is available to you whenever you want. Feel free to hook up with me on any of my sources. LinkedIn, obviously pure business. The other stuff is going to be more about barbecue, movies, and my Kansas City Chiefs football, and that's about it. So if you're looking for something salacious, I unfortunately don't have it, but I probably will post a good barbecue recipe now and then. It is also interesting to note, actually, I'm going to back up just a little bit, in this crazy time of social media and how that's taken off, DataScan, I've been extremely proud. Our company has done an amazing job, not just retaining, but expanding our social media footprint through this nuttiness. And we've kept to some really simple formulas on doing that. And I've been very, very proud of the efforts we've done there. And so it's a good follow. It's usually just, kind of good news efforts and, interesting facts about our business. So for what it's worth. So quick DataScan overview. The company was founded in '89 with a combination of two companies that had like-kind goals and objectives. And we're going to go through those in just a second. We are now located in Alpharetta, Georgia. And in fact, I'm sitting in our building right now. If you know anything about Alpharetta, there's been a massive investment into the downtown area. And DataScan is actually a linchpin in that. We occupy a rather large 4-story building right smack in the middle of downtown Alpharetta, which right now is probably occupied by 3 people. So we're all work from home these days and looking forward to that next phase, which is probably a hybrid way of doing business. But right now, the building's empty. We're wholly owned by JM Family Enterprises. Most of you don't know who that company is, but we are the 19th largest privately held company in the U.S. The cornerstone or the jewel of that JM Family collection of businesses is Southeast Toyota. And Southeast Toyota is the distributor of Toyotas in 5 Southeast states and is the largest effective buyer of Toyotas in the world. We also represent, even though we only have 5 states, we represent about 23% of all Toyota volume sold in the United States. So it's a It's been a great relationship for both JM Family as a distributor and Toyota as a maker and seller of products. Datascan, as I mentioned, was a combination of two companies. The companies did two things that were symbiotic. The first of which was an accounting system that was geared towards floor plan lending. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then an inventory management system, or inventory management, risk management accounting process, right? So basically what happens is when a car dealership wants to go into business, they take out a line of credit or a floor plan loan with a bank or a finance company to pay for their inventory, to basically have stock. And our system accounts for that inventory, and then our field force counts the cars for risk management purposes. So if any of you have seen Fargo, Fargo is in and of itself an example of why Datascan exists. The main character of the show was stealing money from Chrysler Capital, and doing it by selling cars without paying down the floor plan loan. Datascan effectively mitigates that risk on both sides of the ledger. So having said that, our companies are, or our clients are banks and finance companies. In addition to that, Datascan is by far the market leader in this space and had been for a long time. In fact, I would say our systems right now, even with a depressed market, depressed inventory, have about $100 billion of loans that sit on it today, which probably represents about 65% of the entire market. So it's a significant leader in this platform. However, that led us to our evolution. And that evolution was that Datascan recognized and acknowledged in about 2014, 2013, 14, that we had a lack of momentum. You know, we were sort of hitting not just a proverbial wall in our growth, but we were starting to get stale. We were starting to get a little bit mature in our business is probably the best way to describe it. And so from a digital transformation standpoint and also kind of a rebirth type of thought process, Datascan started to reevaluate how we did our business. And the first step we took in that digital evolution, digital change, was to acquire a technology company that was also in Atlanta that had a better mousetrap for counting cars, believe it or not. And that was really our first move in reevaluating and rebuilding our company itself and our internal technologies. We also started to add director talent. We rebranded the company, all new logos, all freshened everything up. And then we started to focus in 2016 on senior level engagement at the client level. And that really led us down a path around defining a client experience that was very different than we'd had before. And we're going to get into more very detailed information around that in just a minute. We also started to invest heavily in our accounting system to modernize that solution set, to modernize the technology so that we were not just a new polished brand, but we became more modern, more relevant, and rebuilt our technology stack so that it was, for example, cloud ready, so that it was had better security around it. All those things that are now very important to technology businesses would not have been able to have been done if we wouldn't have started that process a few years ago. But the biggest thing that we started to talk about was the digital transformation of our clients and how we interface with our clients. And we started that in 2017. And honestly, this is where we're going to focus our case study today. So the case study in and of itself was to kind of look at how we engaged our clients. And there were a number of departments, number of silos, for lack of better terms, that we're all sort of scrambling around within our company to decide how we wanted to distribute information, how we wanted to support our clients, how we wanted to run our events, how we wanted to capture feedback from our clients, how we wanted to process operational changes, even things like soft skill training for support people. All those things started to become things we were talking about, but not talking about in a unified way. And when we really look at DataScan's client digital transformation, that's what it is. It's about cohesiveness in those areas to create a client engagement. Sorry, my notes just shut down. So yeah, so the good news was that everybody was sort of thinking about this. They all had different thoughts around it and different ways that they wanted to fix this engagement, but nobody was quite certain on how to do it. This is really the core of what the conversation is about today, though, is about how we got the leadership and cultural buy-in. And I broke it up into three defining segments so that we can deep dive into each one on how we decided to make the changes we ultimately made and how each kind of sales process in each segment or each group was impacted. So we really we're going to look at executives, my peer group, so the directors that are within this building, and then users, so the people that would be first line and impacted by this to change the way we operate today through a digital transformation. First thing we had to do was really identify the problem statement. And the problem statement to us was that our clients, particularly at the senior levels, were happy about the new brand. They were happy about their new engagement. You know, we were really soliciting our senior executives for strategic advice. We were bouncing new ideas off of them. We were taking them to, a resort in California to hang out for a couple of days so we could talk about these things. It was all very good momentum. However, an executive never even opens our system. Like, we never have a single executive that has an account actually on our system. A bunch of users do, a bunch of managers do, and they were feeling a little isolated. They were not feeling the same kind of love we were giving our executives. And so to really do that and really dig into it, it was going to take a big effort. It was going to take an effort of operational stature and digital support. So we really started to look at those technologies, both internal and external. And internally, we were really struggling with the concept but we were struggling sort of to operationalize how we would do this. And if we were to say, don't invest another nickel, how do you do it with what you got? We had serious issues. We had serious issues around our disparate systems. Right at that time, we had 5 different systems that tracked both client names and contact names. So our clients and contacts were rarely in sync, which created a number of problems. The first of which is, we didn't know how to talk to them. We just didn't. We didn't know who our primary contact should be. We didn't really have a fundamental understanding, or at least a digital place of understanding how to surface operational reporting, how to surface escalation issues. We sort of had person-to-person knowledge of how some of our clients worked, but it was never in a central spot, so that if anybody sort of picked up the phone and said, we've got this issue, we got to deal with it, it was impossible to do. We had to go to the person that had that knowledge in order to execute. It was a real problem for us. Externally, our clients were feeling that same pain. Clients, even though we had 2 solutions, we were operating as very much like 2 different support organizations. So there was no common platform for our client to log into to understand all of the strategic elements around DataScan's support network, or all of the issues they had open with DataScan. It was impossible to do. They had to go to 2 sources to get that information. DataScan didn't have a platform either that could expose our thought leadership. As a dominant player in our industry, we had no ability outside of sending an email to somebody or putting out a press release to demonstrate our thought leadership, our ability to look at individuals within this organization as somebody that could bring out a good idea to our industry, to our clients, and have that digestible to those people. We had no ability to do that. And then communication, which I mentioned before. We were routinely miscommunicating with the appropriate or inappropriate contact at each client. And that just had very much to do with the fact that we just had too much going on, too many disparate systems. Any questions around this, by the way? I think this is a critical part of what helped us get to where we were going. Okay. So here's the direction we ultimately boiled it down to. Let's make it super simple. So in our world, we define client success, and I'll show you some detail around that in just a second. We define client success as the people or the operation, right? So it's the people that are on the phones. It's the client relations people. It is the business development people. It is the technical support people. Those are the people that sort of define client success. We knew we needed to have this digital transformation. And ultimately, when you just boiled it down to its simplest form, when you add those two things up, we were redefining our client experience. So the digital transformation, kind of get into the objective there, what the vision statement was. So our objective was to really redefine that experience and understand what that meant, both from a human capital standpoint and a technology standpoint. So that if we improve the technologies, but then didn't train the associates, we didn't train the people, we didn't build new processes for those people, it would still fail, right? So you could have the slickest piece of technology ever, but if you don't have the people rowing the boat in the same direction you're going in from a technology deployment perspective, it will still feel like the same data scan. It will still feel disjointed. It will still feel messy, which we didn't want to do. So we knew that those were two critical pieces that had to go hand in hand. We needed to unify the support platforms so that a client only had to log into one spot and manage data scan, manage their support, manage their cases, manage their case, have the ability to pull data all in one spot. So case entry, case management in one spot, and then a standardized set of reporting for those people, for case managers. And we needed to retire those legacy systems, collapse them into one. Marketing and knowledge. We needed to have a deposit space for creative videos, for product features, for training ability, for how-to information, for release notes, for all the things that are important for people to be able to resource over time instead of having to search through their emails. The best news with all that is that if you do it right, you're actually then developing a client's self-service platform that has a lot of information and a lot of knowledge that people can access so that they are reducing the amount of time they are talking to or submitting cases to your support teams. And then ultimately client alignment. So getting the contacts, the client information, the client names all put together, right? So this was the beginning of our a vision of true data governance. So define the source and the master and make that live to be the information of record. A good example of that was one of our clients, Volkswagen. Volkswagen, if depending upon who entered the name of the company or the name of Volkswagen in our system, it could have meant VW, it could have meant Volkswagen, it could have meant Volkswagen Credit, it could have meant VCI, it could have meant VW Credit. So we had to take all that information and synthesize it down to one name, Volkswagen Credit. And that sounds like elementary, but that's where we were. And we had a vision of cleaning all that up. We also had a vision of persona creation. So the idea was when we were marketing or talking to our clients, we knew exactly what they meant to us, whether they were an application owner, an executive, a user, operations management, risk management. We have personas now that identify what those people do at our organizations and how we communicate with them, the types of communications. We can be very targeted now when we have an emergency at DataScan, or when we have a weather outage and our auditors in the Northeast can't go count cars that day. I know that I can send now a notification to very specific people to get that done. That was a big part of our vision. To operationalize that, then, we went ahead and changed some things on our side. And we really dug into creating, again, cohesion across the board. Technical support, marketing, and client relations, and now business development are all part of our client experience and under my guidance and my team's overall guidance. And what that does for us is it creates an unprecedented, at least at DataScan, amount of cohesion. We all have the same goals. We all have the same training. We all have the same, we talk the same. We have we share perspectives, but we all have at least a common way of working with and operationalizing that client experience. You may kind of ask yourself, well, how does marketing fit into that, right? Well, for a DataScan, there's nothing more important to us because of our market dominance than retaining clients. This is really a client retention strategy in every way, shape, and form, right? So externally, it feels like a client experience, but internally, it's a client retention strategy. It's the ability to leverage those teams to communicate properly, to create a good experience, to satisfy the needs of the client, to make sure that their system's up and running, and have it all sort of in a good coordinated effort, strategically, tactically, through this delivery. So through that work, we actually did come together and create a recommendation, a solutions recommendation, in order to create this digital transformation for DataScan. And that was to leverage the Salesforce.com suite of products and allow that CRM to be our source of truth for when we talk to a client. So the first thing we had to do was we had identified we needed to upgrade. We had a classic version of the Sales Cloud. We needed to upgrade to their Lightning version. We also wanted to acquire a system that would their Service Cloud, which is the case entry, case management system. So we needed to migrate two systems into one platform, and then build what's known as our DataScan community, which I think they call, weirdly enough, Experience now. And that was to both expose our Service Cloud, so the case entry and case management, to the right personas at our clients, but also to be that repository of knowledge, content, promotion, whatever information we want to put out specific to our clients. And that is a closed community. So it's not a publicly accessible website. It is strictly for our clients. When we presented this idea, it was not met with, a bunch of hurrahs, like I thought it would. It was actually met with challenges. And those challenges came in really at the executive management level in three different ways. The challenges were, of course, cost. The company had previously invested heavily in new core technologies. We'd acquired a company. We had new branding. We had started really, investing in the executives of our clients. And this was just kind of one more thing. The new platform would require an initial setup, installation, and of course, ongoing maintenance and subscription costs. So cost was an issue. The vision was an issue. This started to become a bit of a new concept for DataScan. Even though we're not a huge company, we kind of did operate like two different organizations for a very long time. And that actually served us pretty well. It really wasn't a super, super negative thing to our balance sheet. So the vision was different, right? It sort of was, it just didn't smell like data scanning anymore. We had a lot of success working with the client's senior management, which was great, which I've mentioned a few times. But how would that work on people that utilize our system day to day? Like, how do you translate those good vibes and that experience? So there were a lot of questions around that. And then ultimately, market dominance. Market dominance hurt the vision and hurt the executive line alignment quite a lot. You know, did we really need to invest into a client experience as the market dominant provider? So we had to answer all those questions. So I called them all kind of roadblock removals. And honestly, this was a time, situation. You didn't just show up at a single meeting and present all of my roadblock removals and all of a sudden they all went away. Instead, we started to kind of chunk them up into bite-sized pieces and really started to network with our executive managers, executive management, so that they could start to understand the individual elements of their roadblocks and what it meant for us to overtake them. So from a cost standpoint, we had a bit of good luck there, to be honest with you. And the good luck was that JM Family, our parent organization, was a pretty strong buyer of Salesforce platform products. And so we had massive buying power that sort of trickled down to us, which we were very happy to take advantage of. And so even though we had a viewed to be cheaper platform with another organization, it actually kind of netted out about the same. It really wasn't a big cost increase for us from a run rate standpoint. And in fact, you could argue that we were getting quite a lot more for our money through Salesforce, which I can answer any of those questions if you'd like as well. Cost to implement, support, maintain, enhance were real costs. Those are things that we had to deal with and sort of talk about why we would do this and what that investment looked like. Our view was they would be offset by both efficiencies and higher client satisfaction, client retention. And that has actually over time proven to be the case. Our client sat numbers are very high right now, and we are seeing efficiencies through self-service and better communication lines. I think I touch on that later too, by the way. Sorry. The vision one was much tougher, right? Because it's more like art, right? Costs you can put on a spreadsheet, you can debate them, you can have conversations about them. A vision is much harder. So I really did cut those things into bite-sized pieces and sold them over lunches, over coffee, over hallway conversations, over presentations, so that we could really kind of enhance and deliver a message around a client experience and what that meant. It meant operational efficiencies, self-service, operational reporting, and client sat were all sort of beneficiaries to that client, to that vision that we were trying to establish. But I worked one-on-one with each of the managers to really further educate them on possible outcomes. Market dominance one actually played well in our favor as well, because how can a market dominant company behave in a second-rate way, right? We didn't want second-rate solutions for our clients and our client experience. And so I was sort of able to use our own position against ourselves to help benefit this client experience and digital transformation. Two other things came into play as we started to sell the roadblock removals. One of which was the technical and data aging. So I've kind of staged it that way. The idea that we had multiple systems to manage and multiple systems to deal with really did create data governance challenges. There was a lot of errors and mistakes that we were covering up because of this. And at the end of the day, you bring sort of info security into play when you have aging systems. And the combination of those things sort of planted enough fear seeds into the minds of our executives that it became a component of our conversation. And then removing those elements and going to a more modern platform was very helpful for us. And at the end of the day, admittedly, I was a bit of force in nature. I was persistent, I was passionate, and determined. And I felt very strongly that the combination of these two things was going to make for a much better client experience.
Brian, this roadblock surprises me because as I listen to the first part of the case, I hear a story of organisational transformation underway. You'd acquired another company to get access to their technology, their organisational capital and human capital related to that. You'd been building symbolic capital in branding. You had new human capital in the executive team, and you'd shifted your software and that to the cloud. It seemed to me that you were getting all ready for a digital transformation. You're just putting pieces in place. And that's why, and then suddenly you get this roadblock. I thought you were moving consistently in the one direction, then there's this discontinuity. Can you explain how I interpreted this?
No, that's a great question. I think there were a couple of things with it. One was, I think there was a general perception that it wasn't broken, right? That it was good enough, right? It kept the ship afloat, which is sort of speaks to this market dominance, kind of thinking. The other thing was, and this is a real thing, right? Like I really think the company had project fatigue and a little bit of fatigue around, these other transformations and core, system transformations and the investment that we are making or were making and are making to get us to those spots. I think that we had a little bit of exhaustion. And so to me, this was sort of the last piece of that puzzle that made us more whole from a digital transformation standpoint. And I just think that some of my, and I'll go through the peers here in a little bit, but certainly our executive management was just had project exhaustion as much as anything.
Okay.
That helpful?
Yeah, it is, because it's a nice path when you look at it. I was going to say to people in advance or after this presentation, is you actually have to get your organization in shape before you can do a digital transformation. And this is a very good example how you get all the pieces together and then you're ready to do the digital transformation. But you don't start the digital transformation before the other pieces are there. And that's one of the reasons why some of these fail.
Yeah, and what's funny is, I think the initial view was to do those two big first pieces, and that would be our digital transformation. But as we learn more about that, and we learn more about ourselves, and we learn more about how our clients sort of experience these things, to me, it became not enough, right? Like we weren't quite there.
Yeah.
And so exposing that to executive management, through these roadblock removals was pretty interesting, right? And was pretty eye-opening, I think, for a number of people. Okay, so we'll move on. So let's talk about peer alignment, because for everybody that's I think been in the workforce for quite a long time, you find out very quickly that your peers have a lot of influence on your career, whether you know it or not. And they have a lot of influence on your projects. And so it's not just, getting alignment from executive management and boom, it goes. That's not really, how real life works. And so for me, I spent some time getting the objections from my peers as well. They had similar challenges with the vision. They had challenges in specific division. You'll love this one. I think everybody's heard it. I got the always done things this way comment, right? We've just always done things this way. And so, which, makes my skin crawl, but, it was a challenge with the vision in that standpoint. Current systems work just fine. Got that too. So it was a challenge there. The other challenge was, of course, change, right? Like it's the who moved my cheese moment for them, right? They knew they were going to have to do some work. They knew that time, was already valuable to them and swallowed up. The last thing they needed was another project. They already had their goals for the year, and this wasn't one of them, right? This was not part of their digestion process. And frankly, they just had better things to do. They had better things to deal with within their own department that they ran. I had technology changes or objections at that time, right? Would investing in these current technologies actually solve our challenges? Would the selection and support of these technologies be sort of open, fair? Would they be cohesive with the direction we're going as an organization? There are a lot of questions around technology that, I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting. But it was good that we socialized these things so we can understand how to deal with them. So achieving the buy-in, our roadblock removal for that group, from a vision standpoint, really, it was pretty simple for them, I think, to understand and demonstrate tactical failures. So sending an email to someone who ended up being the wrong person to receive that piece of information, there were dozens of examples that could be shown in that way. Sending an alert to someone that shouldn't have gotten it. There was plenty of those examples. There were examples of how naming organizations, like my VW example, created problems when we were trying to unify data sets. We further discussed our client satisfaction scores. So we send out periodic and then ultimately an annual survey that drives a lot of our bonus structure. And when you demonstrate a shortfall in that and how it impacts your pocket, you start to feel a little differently. Some of the other roadblock removals in vision included the new functionality benefits. Being able to expose my peers as being industry experts played to their ego a little bit, but it also was pent up, right? They knew they had things they could tell our industry, but we didn't have a platform to do it in. Now they have the outlet, the ability to show off who they are, to show their colors, to put out information that's valuable to the industry, to our clients, and they get the byline. And then really, when you're socializing this from a vision standpoint with your peers, I really empathized on, I'll call it the PIA factor, right? The pain in the ass factor, and paint a picture of an easier tomorrow. So while this is a difficult transition, a big project, tomorrow will be better, right? We do have an intention of making your life easier. Otherwise, we wouldn't be going through this pain. On the change roadblock removal, that really was more around time, right? It was time to let people digest it the way they needed to digest it, come to me with questions, have open dialogue. There was really nothing special about explaining to somebody that things needed to change, except for time. From a technology standpoint, once I got that piece of feedback, I broadened my net, so to speak, or I broadened my network to include others' viewpoints from a technology perspective, to evaluate our potential implementation team, to evaluate technologies, to understand what it was going to take to maintain those technologies. And I really did collaborate more heavily to solve for true support and maintenance. Again, for me, going into this process, even with the vision I shared with you a couple slides ago, the technology piece of it was actually a blind spot for me. I was very customer centric, and the idea of sort of supporting that piece of technology within our own four walls then became something new to me and something that I had not thought about during that process. My peers pointed it out very clearly, and we worked to solve it together. Technical aging and data aging. So the multiple system management issue. This actually did strike a chord with my peers. So the idea that we had true info security concerns, we had true data governance challenges, we had errors and mistakes that were heading out our door. Those things actually rung incredibly well with them. Those were also tied to the vision, I think. And they were, tactical challenges and embarrassments, to be honest with you, that we needed to deal with as peers And it was a really strong roadblock removal item for us. So user alignment was a lot simpler, right? And it really was change. That was about the only thing we had to, the objection we had, right? Even though the system we were using wasn't great, they had sort of modified it or worked around it to operate and configure and leverage for their current needs, right? So someone could sit down on Monday and utilize the current system we were leveraging effective enough to get through their day. It wasn't ideal, but they had figured it out. They had also kind of a who moved my cheese moment. And then, of course, the last objection under change was they got to learn a new platform. A little simpler. So how did we remove those roadblocks? Outside of the customizations that I mentioned, no one was super happy with that current solution. So what I did, and what we ultimately did as a project, is we started to really pull people in to become part of the process. We created functional requirements as part of the design process, and we involved everybody to comment on them. We allowed people to participate in larger scale meetings and design discussions, as well as once we started actually the process, we involved them and they were heavy in testing the application and were part of the feedback loop. So that if they had found a piece of functionality during testing that wasn't going the way they thought it should, we actually exposed them then to a larger group of audience to explain that bug, explain that issue, explain that use case, and it created buy-in. They were part of the process. So we have now what I call a break in the action. This is the fun part of my presentation. So last year, I loved 5 streaming services or streaming videos, and I wanted to share them with you. I really loved Watchmen, Queen's Gambit, What We Do in the Shadows, Ted Lasso, and The Mandalorian. So for what it's worth. So before we kind of get into the project itself, were there any questions around C-suite and cultural buy-in? Because that's the core of what we were talking about. It's what we just covered outside of my streaming services. And after, kind of post that, I'm going to walk through the actual project as part of this case study. So are there any questions around buy-in before we move on?
Yeah, I have some questions as usual.
Awesome.
Yeah, you had to build an internal systems of engagement with your peers and senior management. And a lot of that is building social capital or building on the social capital that you already had. How long had you been in the organization? And what do you think was the level of your social capital at the beginning of the change and at the end of the change?
So I had, that's a great question, Rick. So I had spent 9 years at JM Family before, and I left. But during that time, I did have some interactions with Datascan. So I knew a lot of the management. I knew a lot of the players. I left the organization for a couple of years, and then I got recruited back, and specifically to come into Datascan. I've been with the company now 6 years. So I was 2.5 years into my tenure this time around, and I was in a more business development type of role, business development and marketing. And so, but I had success, right? I had success rebranding the company. People knew that I had a history of building senior level relationships with our clients. They knew that I had a history of, pretty strong views on client activities. Oh, is that a question? Oh, no. And so I think that I had some social capital coming into it, but I was also had the social capital of potentially being a bit of a cowboy. right? And so I had to kind of overcome that for myself in order to get buy-in from both my peers and senior management. And that this was not a cowboy up situation. This was the right thing to do for our clients. And so it's a great question because it has a lot of elements to it, but that's kind of how it went. I would say fast forward to post digital transformation and post our current, kind of client experience model. My social capital has increased pretty dramatically, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's become a real central point of our overall client retention program, but also just how we operate, right? And so I work very, very closely with our product teams, our technology teams, on how we go to market, what we go to market with, where we're looking to expand, M&A, all those types of things, because my view has allowed us to do that, right? We've got this thing trued up. Now, what can we do to grow? Because this is pretty solid now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because success is often critical to building social capital and people trusting you to undertake a major change. And probably they recruited you back again because they knew you fitted in.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Maybe more for that than your technical skills.
Oh, I have minimal technical skills.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think of things, right?
Yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions about buy-in, cultural, or C-suite, either one? Okay. So with that, we'll kind of talk about the project itself and sort of how that overlaid with what I've presented to you. So really what we did to kind of round out the vision, and once there was adoption, right, we had it felt like we were getting approval on the project, we were getting approval on the vision. So how did we, kind of round things out? We did interview clients. We talked to them about their pain points. We really tried to understand both at a user and a mid management level, as well as the personas I mentioned, what were the challenges that they faced in interacting with DataScan. I attended several Salesforce events. I went to a couple of Dreamforces, which I'm sure you've heard of, and really tried to help me develop a true vision of how we could kind of create this digital transformation. And ultimately, there was just a bunch of research, research. I read a lot. I was in a more business development capacity versus a client retention capacity when I came back to DataScan. And so this was a little bit of a twist, right? And things had changed, right? The world had changed a little bit, and the way people wanted to be serviced had changed. And one of the great quotes I saw during this process was that even though we're B2B, right? We're 100% B2B. I don't talk to a consumer ever. Clients want to be treated like consumers, right? They just do, right? That's what they're used to. They're used to being consumers, regardless of whether it's a business to business or not. They are humans. They are people that you have to interface with and really grow relationships with. And when you're doing it in any kind of business to business atmosphere, unless you're a local provider for business to business products and solutions, you're doing it digitally. And so we really had to get that right. I also reviewed solutions with our sister companies. So I had mentioned that JM Family had been a big investor in Salesforce.com, and we visited those facilities. We tried to figure out how they were leveraging that product for their own digital transformation. Helped a ton. And then we discovered the delta, right? The delta between the vision and reality, right? When you have a vision and you have these thought processes on, what sort of ways you can solve for stuff, you also have to get some grounding in reality and make it really understood before you're heading into the project. We also did a lot of tactical prep. So we interviewed and selected a implementation partner. We did ultimately select Victoriam, but it was critical to that process. critical to the management's review, our cultural buy-in, all those things. This was going to be a critical relationship for us to make sure that we were successful in what we thought we wanted to get done. We went through multiple layers of that selection process and interviewed, smaller organizations, bigger organizations, and all kinds of different consulting firms to get this completed. And ultimately, we felt like Advic was just a really solid cultural fit for us, and they glommed onto our vision very quickly, which meant a lot. We needed to do a lot of data cleanup. I mentioned it a couple of times, but we needed to change up and kind of unify our client information, names, contacts, names of the businesses, addresses, all those things became the beginning of our true data governance. And that was a massive pre-work effort. So kind of getting to work. So when we really started the project, we looked at what we needed to get done. The first thing, of course, we had to get done, which I've mentioned, we had to do a Sales Cloud cleanup. So we had a very small, limited use Salesforce.com deployment that was mostly used for our business development professionals to track contacts, opportunities, all the typical things you would see in a sales process. But that needed to get cleaned up and start to become that system of record. So that was part of the data governance process. And then also, it just needed modernized. There were a lot of things that had changed between when we had set it up and when we were trying to redeploy it. And so that needed to be a big effort. We also built out 4 different Service Cloud use cases. And those use cases ended up allowing us to have one source of truth, one system of record, but allow people to sort of customize how they worked based on the type of support role they had or the type of client relations role they had. So it was a big effort to define those user personas, those data sets that would be available to them, and how that would work from a dashboarding and reporting system standpoint. We also started to develop our community cloud and figure out the best way to leverage our external personas so that it would give them access to the information that's important to them. So a good example is when we had a bank, maybe that only bought one of our solutions and didn't buy the other. Maybe they leveraged our accounting system, but they did audits or inventory checks on their own. They would only have access then to that sort of data set, that sort of information for themselves. So when they logged into our community, the only thing they would see is information pertaining to our accounting system, and then of course their cases and case management. We could then turn around and embed videos, white papers, how-tos, announcements, user stories into that content for the community cloud. And then allowed us to organize and promote that content. It's been a great tool for us. The biggest key again was active participation. We knew that this was going to impact a lot of people internally and externally. And we leveraged group leaders and representation for each group that was impacted, including our clients. And that worked out, I thought, extremely well. So this is kind of my wrap-up slide. And this is where, we talked a lot about, and I think Rick had mentioned in an earlier session that I think it's one out of every 8 digital transformations is actually a success. And ours, I think, has been a resounding success. And so from my standpoint, from my view, what made it a success? And some of this I've talked about. In fact, I've probably talked a lot about most of it. But active participation, I cannot tell you how important it is not to do this in a silo. It won't be adopted if you do it in a silo. I made decisive decisions. And what I mean by that is when something came up, either from Victoriam or someone from our team, we made quick decisions. We did not dwell on these decisions. You cannot allow a decision to bog down the process. We met frequently. We had in-depth conversations. We leveraged our leaders across the entire institution and with our clients. We truly made ourselves accountable to the team. We absolutely shared financial updates, project updates. We were completely transparent in the process, which is my last bullet, but it was all critical to that victory. We focused on the important stuff. That sort of ties back to the decisive decisions. I really didn't allow small challenges, small issues, or personal preferences to slow down the project. We were going to get to a finish line, and I was going to push off the things that were like to haves in an effort to make sure that all the need to haves happened. I didn't allow those small losses to derail the overall vision. The overall vision was still good. The client experience vision was still solid. And if you had a small loss, we didn't dwell on it, we moved on. The implementation partner management, I thought, was also critical. We had frequent checkpoints with our project management, and we held each other accountable to those things. I mean, one of the best things that I thought came out of that relationship with Advic is that we really did force Advic to deliver best practices as a partner. That's not what you're going to see with every consulting firm. You're just not. If you say, hey, I need this thing done and I need it done this way, they'll find a way to get it done, but it may not be best for you in the long run. It may be difficult to maintain. It may break every 5 minutes. There's any number of things. And I really did have an accountability expectation for Victoriam to deliver best practices to us. Frequent meetings with management, where we talked about budget tracking, functionality progress, discovery, our timelines, and what's next. That was critical to the success. And for me, it was complete and utter transparency. We did everything that anybody could see at any time. There was no hidden anything. So that's what I thought made a success.
Well, Brian, thank you very much. That's a very thoughtful and insightful presentation. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. Fernando wants to know, what was the time frame for this digital transformation of Salesforce?
Yeah, so great question. So we chunked it up into phases. As I mentioned, we had, I think, 4 different sort of use cases or personas that we were trying to solve for. And the first phase of that, which was the biggest one, I think was a 5 to 6 month effort. And the second phase was less. It was 4 months-ish. So I would say overall, to get everything to where we are today, it took about a year. But we were able to chunk it up into bite-sized or more reasonable pieces.
So Brian, just to kind of unpack that a little bit, is that the shell of Salesforce? Because there are many, kind of plug and play components in there that you can do, whether it's Pardot or other interactions or even, accounting systems. So can you unpack that a little bit more and share to help support maybe the question of Fernando, unless Fernando that answers
Yeah, no
question.
problem. Yeah, so I think that, great question. I'll give you more specifics then. The Sales Cloud, that was probably to refactor Sales Cloud and to get it from Classic to Lightning, that was probably a 2-month process. Then we started in on Service Cloud, and that ran in parallel with our Community Cloud. So those were the 3 big components we were buying from Salesforce.com. An upgrade to Sales on the Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, and Community Cloud. Within Service Cloud, we were serving 4 different masters, so to speak. We split that effort up and ran Community Cloud in parallel. So when we launched our first instance of Service Cloud, it took about 6 months, 5-6 months. And when we did that, we launched our first version of Community Cloud and our first Service Cloud that managed all of our technology support on the same day. So 5 to 6 months to get that done. Then we worked on moving the other disparate systems and processes into that same org, and that took another 4 months. and the rest of them kind of came together. So I had 3 that came together and rolled into that first one. Those were they were smaller efforts, to be honest with you. And I think they took about 4 months to get right and be ready for production. And then from that standpoint, from the community standpoint, again, we ran that process in parallel, and all we did the day that they went live was make minor configuration changes to our community so that they could go live and still carry over the persona of the products that they bought, who they were, all those kinds of things. So all in all, about a year project.
Thanks, Brian. This is Fernando. So just to give a little background for what we're doing is also the classic to lightning sort of switchover.
Yeah.
And so prior to doing that, we're trying to clean up a lot of the 9 to 10-year-old legacy stuff that has gone unused. So like to give an example, for the account, object, there's like 300 fields that we can get rid of. That we don't have to carry over. So we're going through those exercises. So a lot of what you spoke about resonated with myself and Andrew, who was on my team. So
yeah, we were pretty slash and burn in that case. We sort of resigned ourselves to the fact that we weren't going to care too much about the past with those things, because the only thing that was really critical was to get the name of the company, name of the account correct, and the contact correct. And that was really the focus. The stuff that was sort of ancillary to those things within our Sales Cloud, if they carried over, great. If they didn't, I didn't care. And so some did, some didn't, right? Some things did carry over, some didn't. We're not an organization that is really dependent upon our success based on a Sales Cloud. We're way more dependent on our success based on Service Cloud.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you, Brian. We do have another question from Kristen. Have you been able to capture the deflection rate of support tickets because of the digital transformation?
So that's an outstanding question. And initially we did. I will tell you that COVID changed things, and you wouldn't think it would, but it did. And so initially within a couple of months, we had a pretty dramatic reduction. I think we were seeing a reduction of 20% of our case volume very consistently for almost a year before COVID. And honestly, when a year ago, several things changed, and working from home changed. And we honestly saw that, some of our users changed their behaviors. And so right now we're very focused on making sure that our community has more usable data so that it can be more predictive on what people start to type in as a case to help with that deflection. We're a little behind on that right now, but because we've seen a pretty serious increase since COVID, and we're working to try to tune that up a little bit, and actually working with Advic to get that in a better spot. Again, we don't have consumers, right? They are business to business. So the ticketing is not quite as voluminous as it would be if you had lots of consumers, right? That said, the severity of what they're typing in and what they're asking about tends to be high, right? So I can't get to this report, or this extract didn't work, or whatever those things are. We've seen more of that just because there's been a lot of clunkiness from working from home.
Brian, this seemed to be, to me, to be more about a project to improve client relationships and incidentally a digital transformation. When you were talking, you were often forefronting the problem with your system of engagement and things like that. And that's what you're trying to solve. And there's quite a bit of research that shows successful CIOs forefront the organizational problem and hide the technology solution as much as possible, so the clients really understand what you're doing. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, it is. But I felt equally strong about how to operationalize it as well as the digital transformation.
Okay.
I thought if you did one versus the other, you would be shortchanging yourself. I really did. I thought it was doing it, halfway.
Good.
Any other questions or comments for Brian? Well, again, Brian, thank you very much. We will ask you to stay around if you don't mind as we wrap up today's session. So everyone, we're going to transition to Rick real quick. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Rick.
Yes.
Thanks, Brian. Great case. Very, very interesting. I'll pitch some of those ideas for my classes. Let me share my screen and so I'm just going to pull together some of the thoughts that I've presented during these sessions. So this is the finale. You can play the trumpets or something like that, Gary. Oops. This is a quote that I read last week from a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. He was one of the people who developed computational chemistry. Back in 1967, you'll notice what he says there, that they had a pretty small computer. These days, they're 10,000 times the memory and clock speed. So he says, we really do have quite phenomenal amounts of computing at our hands today. Trouble is, it still requires thinking. And that's what I've tried to do in this course. And that's what the various presentations have done as well. They've helped you to think about the problem. The technology is just a starting point, but if you don't think carefully about it and how you're going to deploy it, how you're going to link with people, as you've heard today, building the social capital, building all of the organizational capital to make the transformation, the technology is pretty useless. So thinking is really important. And I've given you a number of tools to help you think. First of all, the notion that you are in a socio-technical system and you have three types of transformation. And the easiest one is just to change the task. Maybe going to a single sign-on instead of multiple sign-ons is a fairly straightforward change that people can adapt to pretty quickly. But then we saw a change in the systems that were available, particularly the use of Salesforce. And then I think you saw the change in the business model. This was transformed initially in order to make the transition to a different sort of company. I think we saw more evidence of this last week when we saw ADCO, when they moved from being a transactional business to a relationship business. And they sorted that out first, their framing changed, and then they went through all of these other stages as well. So social systems are really very critical. Those are the hard things that you need to change at times. Those are the ones that require a lot of good relationships with your peers and your senior management team and your clients. And Brian mentioned all of those sorts of things today. The technical changes are often simpler to execute. So that's one model to think of, the alpha, beta, and gamma change. Gamma change is really hard to do. As Brian said, it's a vision. And it's very hard to put numbers on visions. You don't know how they're going to turn out. And in fact, a lot of time, visions fail. They typically occur when companies have to make a major shift in their business model to remain competitive. And that's a tough execution. And that's why vision is difficult to implement at times. I've talked about the organization as a capital creation system. Remember, the name of the game is to create capital. And you use systems to create capital. So here's an integrated perspective. You'll see the 5 types of systems at the bottom. Today, we were mainly talking about systems of engagement, but very much involved with that was a system of record as well. This is a company's organizational capital. Sometimes you have to acquire it from another company. So we heard the data scan needed to acquire some systems capability and technology in order to move forward in the transformation. That was an early part of the organizational transformation. The thing that holds everything together is human capital. And that's possibly the scarcest resource that we have in many organizations, the high level of human capital that can envision change and execute change, both from a social and technical perspective. And then the other sorts of capital are around there, and often they're a foundation for your company that you might be using economic capital to create economic capital. But remember, it's the organisational capital that we see dominating many situations in companies today. And I've heard that from you when you've been speaking in the sessions or have sent me messages. I gave you a model for digital capital creation, how you go through the stages of represent, augment, reformulate, and transcend. The first part is incremental and the second part is radical. And some of you have sent me your matrices to how you might develop your capital creation capabilities. And many of you are probably trying to go too far. You're trying to reformulate everything or transcend everything. These are very difficult changes, and you can get fatigue, as you heard today. So you have to think very carefully about which things are really central for you to transcend or reformulate. And today we heard about reformulating the relationship with the client. They're not transcending, they're not doing anything radically different because they're using off-the-shelf software in the form of Salesforce, reconfiguring it to meet their needs, but they're reformulating their relationship with their clients. And then I'd like you to keep thinking about this notion that there are markets out there or mountains out there to be discovered. And we saw the example of Tesla. The traditional car industry has operated around internal combustion engines, dealerships, return to repair, and there's a certain level of productivity that they can attain, and many of them are towards the top of that mountain. And then along comes Tesla and says, right, it's going to be electric vehicles, no dealership, but a showroom, and we patch your software. AGCO is similar in that it's working on a new mountain. It's the relationship model with equipment that has sensor networks in it and reports data, and it's very much a data analytics driven business. It's a different mountain that it now has to climb and compete with John Deere and others in that industry. They've all sort of found the mountain at the same time. It's not, I think, as distinct as Tesla, but in your industry, there is another mountain out there, and someone will find it, and someone will do an Amazon to your industry and leave you possibly stranded on the old mountain. Ideally, you find the new mountain. That's the big challenge for many companies. But if you can do that, you can reformulate your industry, you can find a higher level of productivity, and you can escape from your competitors because you're climbing a quite different slope and they have to catch up with you. So keep looking for mountains. Now, I've given you models, generalized models, such as capital creation and the 5 types of systems. But we learn both from these models and from specific examples. The abstract gives you a general way of thinking about it, but often we need specific examples to give us hints of how we might implement it in our company, or to be able to tell stories to management about, look, this is what company X achieved, and get them excited about the possibilities, and then look at it systematically through a generalized model. But specific examples are very good for getting people's attentions. And so I've also given you a lot of examples in this course, probably well over 100, if you think about the various companies we've discussed. I gave you this matrix for thinking about the 6 types of capital and the 4 types of stages that you can go through. And there's an example there for everyone that I gave you in the slides. So if you're interested in a particular combination, say natural to reformulation, there's an example there that you can look at and maybe draw upon that to help inform management of what the possibilities are, and then maybe expose them to models like this. But don't go in and give them the big model without trying to get their interest aroused first by, look, this is what we can achieve. This is what company X has achieved. We often learn by imitating. This is a vicarious method of learning by observing how others learn and adapting from that. And then there's the virtuous interaction model. And Brian talked today about they lacked that. They had different systems of engagement that didn't talk to each other. The data didn't go into the same system of production, and so forth. Now, what you see on occasions now, and you saw this with AGCO, is there were two systems of, two virtuous interaction systems. One was AGCO's, but it was also trying to link with the virtuous interactions that the farmer was trying to achieve. You know, the farmer has a goal of raising the productivity. They have a system of production, the tractors, but they also have a system of engagement with someone like AGCO, which provides them equipment and access to technology. They create systems of record that didn't exist before in the farming business. And there are systems of inquiry that they combine with the knowledge from AGCO to do the data analytics and their own capabilities in that area, or those they get from agronomists. So this virtuous interaction can be a merging of multiple systems and bringing in outside partners as well. But ultimately, you want to try and get this into a seamless set of interactions between the various systems, so you can gradually improve your system of framing by understanding how your partners are acting, how your customers are acting, how your advisors are providing data for you, and so forth, so that you've got a continually improving system. Here are some of the capital creation options and examples. I discussed a few of these. I showed you how you might convert, for example, economic capital into organizational capital by stringing together a number of different systems. So it's a sequence of systems that move you from one capital form to another capital form. I didn't go through all of these, but if you get the book, you'll find there's about 40 cases there that, again, you can draw upon to inspire people, to inform people what the possibilities are, and also to give you some thoughts about how we might do this, because you have lots of different opportunities to convert capital from one form to another. I can give you the abstract, but you also need the cases to give it the realism that makes it convincing. In terms of cognitive computing, I laid out a mindscape for you. I used the system of framing model again, and you see I've populated it with different types of technology that you can use for, say, solving a problem with system of engagement or system of production and so forth. This is incomplete because new forms of technology will come along that can be added to each of these segments. So as you see and scan the environment, look for major developments such as maybe 3D printing. Where would this fit in your cognitive computing mindscape? How might that change, for example, your system of production? So I've given you another framework here, and then I populated it with lots of examples as I gave the talk to give it some realism and some practicality. And I divided that into operational and strategic. I also introduced the notion of psychographic profiling, shift from the traditional analytics built around demographics, which often tell you about income and where people live and gender and things like that, but they don't explain their behaviour. And this is the new trend based upon recognising that people have 5 basic aspects of their personality. This was the Ocean model. And this has been enabled by people revealing their preferences through things like Facebook and Twitter and so forth when they like things. So now companies can access details of a person's personality and see how they react, maybe on your website or maybe to various aspects of your system of engagement. But understanding how customers behave is a much better indicator of what they might prefer in terms of your services than the traditional analytics of where they live and their income and those sorts of things. And I also presented the notion that the modern form of capital creation is an object-oriented model, well illustrated by AGCO last week or the week before. And also Uber and Lyft are very simple models of object orientation. The goal is to identify the objects in your environment that you can put together in a different way that create a value proposition for your existing clients or a new set of clients. It's a pretty simple model to understand. And I think it's the essence of many of the organisations that we see emerging today that command very high values very quickly and can grow very quickly. And remember, the goal of a transformation is to raise C prime. It's not to install computers or software. Ultimately, you must get focused on the purpose of the organisation, which is to create capital more productively than any of your competitors. And if you keep that in mind, then you are more likely to have a successful digital transformation. But don't let the technology decide the transformation. Let the goal of capital productivity decide how you're going to take the journey and what you're going to achieve from that journey. So I appreciate very much the efforts of Gary to put together this series of seminars. He's recruited some great people to give you practical experience that's very valuable and goes alongside the academic approach that I'm able to give you. And I think the combination of the two is the ideal approach. And it gives you a set of tools and a set of examples that will increase the probability of you executing a successful digital transformation. So thank you very much for the opportunity to learn with you over the last 5 weeks. Back to you, Gary.
Oh, Rick, thank you very much. It's been an honor to learn and join you on this journey. It's also been an honor and a privilege to learn and join each of you on this learning journey. We're in the process of sending out certificates. Some of you may have already received those, but I want to say congratulations. You will receive a certificate via email. There's also a survey in there. We strongly encourage everyone to carefully give us your open, honest feedback. This is the way that we continue to enhance and provide these programs. When we do take all the feedback very seriously, we do read it, and we do make adjustments as necessary, whether it's speakers, content, time length, and so forth. Also, as you consider how you continue to lead in your organization, please consider partnering with Terry College of Business, Office of Executive Programs. We provide professional development programs, beginning with leading change, strategy, programs like this for digital transformation, as well as Lean Six Sigma. Again, please join me in thanking Dr. Rick Watson for his time together with us for 5 weeks. And congratulations to each of you. Well-deserved, and your certificates are on the way. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and I'll stay on to keep the session open. Congratulations.
Thanks, everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Rick, Gary.
You're welcome.
This is Ellen. Quick question. Will we still have access to the learning materials through the, I guess it's the portal or where we sign into?
Yes.
How long
Ellen,
will we have access?
That's a great question. We are going to keep that up for a couple of months, so you will have access to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Alan, I tell all my students they have lifetime access to my material, so just contact me at any stage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, very good.
I'm good for a few more years.
Very good. Thank you.